Like the music, I'll just turn it. Just let me know when to start. Oh, I'm good. Okay. All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Kietta Walker-Parker, and I am the director of your writing center. Oftentimes, we affectionately are known as the right place, and most recently, we have been given the title of the loving center. And we both love both of those titles, the right place as well as the loving center, because the right place, in a sense that anything pertaining to English or writing, when you come to 125 CCN, you are indeed at the right place to get help, assistance, to improve on your skills, or have a sense of community to sit down and discuss ways in which you can grow as a writer, as a communicator, as someone in English. And that also brings us to the Loving Center because we love to expand our horizons and to appeal to all sorts of majors, disciplines, avenues in which writing communication is very important. And that brings us to the purpose of this workshop. And this will be a series of workshops in which we will look at APA style and format, which is by the American Psychological Association. This style and formatting style is typically done, well, it's typically done by those who are majoring in the sciences, typically APA. However, APA, American Psychological Association, as well as MLA, Modern Languages Association, those are probably, I would imagine, the two most popular style formats. However, there are many, 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 many more. Okay. So it really depends on the who you are presenting for, who you are writing for, who is publishing your efforts. And depending on that, as well as your major, your discipline, that will pretty much dictate which format that you use. However, for this series, this will be us taking a look at APA. Now, how I am structuring this series, and we're only going to do a little bit at a time throughout the series. So today, I want to show you, in a sense, of how this series will be organized, and through each workshop in the series, we will talk about these items in which I'm calling the 6 C's. And those mean clarity, consistency, credit, citations, construct or construction, and, well, bias free, but basically candid. Okay. That may be a typo, but candid. All right. Writing center directors, we make mishaps too. So let's look at the first one. Why APA? Why? Why APA? Well, basically, the premise behind all of these is that in order to be clear, in order to be consistent, in order to efficiently and effectively credit not only your research, but the research of others, and that your efforts are communicated, there has to be some sort of a standard in which no matter who is actually doing the writing, that the reader can follow along, that the reader can can discern your research efforts from the research efforts of others, such that the reader can maybe pick up upon, expound upon what you left off at without per se reinventing the wheel, such that the reader can understand clearly what you are aiming to communicate to them. Not only is the information clear, but they can also understand and follow your direction, your efforts, your organization, which will further their understanding. And that this is easy for them, in a sense, is reader friendly, is readable. So all of that goes into the clarity, and we'll talk more about that. Okay. The next C is consistency. Think in terms of this. If I were to write something and you were to write something, and we are submitting our efforts to the same publication, how would it look if my efforts look distinctively different than your efforts? And mind you, that publication may have 20 other efforts as well, and they are all different. That would confuse the reader. It would look, as I'll say, maybe a hot mess. Nothing is the same, nothing is similar. And a lot of what we do, a lot of what we say, a lot of what we see is based on consistency. And if it's inconsistent, then in our eyes, in our heads, we think that the information may not be dependable. So consistency is very important, and we will talk about that, um, in this presentation. And then the third thing is credibility, credit. Who are you giving credit to. So, who wrote what? Who said what? Who did what? Who conducted what research studies and why? Who was the originator of those ideas? Unless it has reached the status of common knowledge. So remember, it is important that everyone is given credit based off of what they have done to further your efforts or their efforts. Okay. So, giving credit is very important, um, you know, within APA and within, most styles and guidelines. The fourth thing is citations. So this is documenting using a specified peer-reviewed set standard convention in which a group of people come together every few years, maybe every year, it depends, it's not consistent, but they come together to decide upon what are going to be the standards for our guidelines. So, in this sense, what are the standards for APA? And right now, we are in the seventh edition of APA. So, it doesn't change often, but it does change. And typically, it changes based on the times, in a sense. So you want to adhere to the standards. And depending on the publication, depending on the purpose, depending on your professor, okay, you may ask them, okay, which version, okay, should you adhere to? However, today, the most current version is the seventh version or the seventh edition of APA. The next one is construct or construction, and that is basically formatting. Remember how I told you about the look, okay, the look and feel of the document? So, what does the document look like? According to a specified peer reviewed set standard convention. And again, those same group of people, they get together, okay, and based on the times, okay, they decide, what should that document look like. And I will say that with APA, not much has changed per se in the look and feel. However, I will say that I can think of since I've been using and learning about APA. I can say that double spacing. Now, some publications, some professors, they may say it's okay to use 1.5 inch spacing instead of a double space. However, APA is clear, okay? A double space is APA format, not 1.5, okay? Another thing I will say is, and this has changed with the times, when I first started going to school many, 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 many moons ago, because we dealt with typewriters, two spacings was considered correct after the period. Okay, so before you start that next sentence, you would space twice. Okay. However, because of the times, which today pretty much everything is electronic, and electronically, our spacing is much more exact than that of a typewriter. So finally, APA in this version of 7, okay, version 7, one spacing after the period is true or correct APA. Okay. So how is that document set up? The headers, the running heads, um, the margins, all of that. What does that document look like? That is formatting. And we will go more into that. And then the last one, the C, is candid. And in other words, bias free. So, yes, you are doing the research, but how do you communicate your research? And how do you communicate the research efforts of others? There has to be, remember, your paper should represent something that's dependable, that we can count on, because all of this is your reputation, your credibility. So your paper should present a direct, honest, unbiased, or biased free look into whatever it is that you are researching, your purpose and whatnot. So it needs to be based on fact, okay? Not exaggerations, not elaborations, okay? And definitely not figments of our imagination, okay? So it should be unbiased. And if it helps you to look at it this way, it needs to be very clinical. And when we think in terms of clinical, we think in terms of sterile. We think in terms of what? Clean lines, white, basic, okay? Maybe a little silver, stainless steel in it, but just very clinical. No flowery, no floral, no perfumey, just very clinical in our communication. Okay. Another way of thinking about it is maybe detached from it, that nothing is personal, even though you've spent many hours conducting your experiments in your labs and talking to people and researching their ideas, aiming to duplicate or reverse engineering, the efforts of others in order to support your findings. So you've put a lot of yourself into your research. However, when you communicate your results, you cannot lead others into what you want them to believe. It needs to be supported. So it needs to be supported with evidence, with results. So direct, honest, bias free language. Okay. So it needs to be fair. It needs to be equitable. It needs to be even handed. And these are the 6 items that throughout this series that we will tackle, okay? So remember the 6 C's: clarity, consistency, credit, citations, construct or construction, and candid, okay? Now, let's go into clarity and conciseness. So, you want to ask yourself, can my readers follow what I'm aiming to say in my document? That is your primary objective. Can they follow it? Can they understand it? Am I leading them down a path that they can follow? Okay. So here are some don'ts. Do not misrepresent details or your data. Okay. You want to be honest with your data. You want to be honest as you detail and explain and elaborate on your findings, on your results. You do not want to confuse your readers with extra wordiness or unnecessarily complex sentences and jargon. Now, listen, when you're using APA as a scientist, as an engineer, as a psychologist, as a speech therapist, as a social worker, okay, or those other many scientific fields, that for some people it may go over their heads. But let's go back to our objective. Can readers follow? If we are too wordy, and that is my problem, okay, that's my major mistake, okay? All right, wordiness. But I have to think in terms of, can my readers or can any reader follow what I've written? If they can't follow it, it's not their issue, it's my issue. I'm the one who is responsible. And listen, there are four types of sentences, right? We have simple, complex, compound, compound, complex. Even as a great scientist, brilliant scientist, you do not have to always use complex sentences or compound sentences or compound complex sentences. You don't, every sentence does not have to have 20, 30 words to it. Your sentences don't have to have unnecessary jargon to make it sound brilliant, to make it sound credible. Let's go back to our objective. Can readers follow what we've written? And within writing, every type of sentence is important. And if you have too much or too many of the same type of sentence, you will either what? Intimidate your readers, or you will alienate your readers. Think about it. If you use all simple sentences, okay, then you are implying that your readers aren't intelligent enough to understand what you're saying. You're speaking to them at a too low of a level of their understanding. Now, on the flip side, if every single sentence is a compound complex sentence, you can also alienate your readers. They may ask themselves, well, why didn't they just say this instead of 20, 30 words or 10 or 15 words in one sentence? So the key is variety, sentence variety. Okay. Now, I'm not saying not to use words that are not applicable to your field. Okay. So, yes, you do want to use words that are applicable to your field. But outside of that, you don't have to pretend to be someone that you are not. Okay. So ask yourself, can readers follow what you have written? Now let's look at this third point, which is a don't. A don't. Do not use poetic language or excessively so. Remember, you want to be candid with your information. You want to be detailed and specific. So you do not want to use metaphors or analogies unless they help the readers. Nor do you want to use poetic devices like rhyming schemes or alliteration either. Okay. Now, what are some do's? You want to be specific. You do not want to be vague. And in another session, we'll go over, some of these, right? To give you some examples of what we mean by specificity, what we mean by vague, being vague. Okay. So you do not want to be, you do want to be specific, not vague. You want to be specific in your descriptions and your explanations. Don't assume that your readers will understand. So sometimes you may have to detail your explanations, your examples. Okay. You do want to unpack details. So summaries are good, but not always. So summaries at the end of your chapters, right? Maybe at the end of your paper, maybe, but you don't want to summarize your experience, your experiments throughout. Those opportunities are when you want to detail what you did, detail how you set it up, detail how did you come about that particular experiment. Okay, how did that come about? Okay. You do want to provide adequate information. Give them enough, maybe more than enough, adequate information without duplication. Okay. So, again, ask yourself, can my readers follow? You want to cut out unnecessary verbiage. That goes back to be concise. Okay. And all of this is saying that as you're writing your paper, these are multiple iterations or multiple drafts. Okay. Word choice matters. So you do need to be specific. Use action oriented words, words that have substance to them. Okay, words that are quantifiable. Okay, so word choice matters. Use words specific or applicable to your discipline. Word choice matters. You do want to use simple descriptive adjectives. Again, you don't want to alienate your readers. And the last one is plain language. That goes back to what we said before. You do not have to always use complex or compound sentences. Okay. Plain language that does not risk confusing your meaning, because sometimes we could use words that the meaning completely escapes the reader. Okay, so plain language is okay to use. It does not have to be complicated. Okay, again, remember, can your readers follow what you've written? Now, let's talk a little bit about consistency. Okay, and in another presentation, we will show examples. Okay, but consistency. So, you don't want to what? Agitate the reader. And when I mean agitate them, you don't want shock value. You want to be predictable, because being predictable is being consistent, right? There's no shock value. And you want to be reader friendly in your consistency. So your objective is predictability, reader friendliness, and doing so that will build authority. So, from the writer standpoint, the researcher standpoint, the sources of where you found that particular information. Okay, and so how do we do this? Well, first of all, we look at the structure and formatting, neat, clean, and adhering to the standard convention of APA. So in this instance, 7.0, okay? The citations and references. Again, you want to adhere to keeping up that solid reputation, okay? Your reputation. So you want to make sure that based on the citations as well as the references, that your readers can find your information. And not just your information, but the same information that you used in your presentation. Okay. And then the writing style. So, again, you want to be predictable. You want to use um, reader friendly fonts. You don't want to put everything in bold or everything using italics, or one instance your font is 20 points, another instance is 11 point fonts. You don't want to do that. So the writing style, the spacing on the page, okay? Your headings, again, you want consistency. Now, tables and figures. Believe it or not, there is not an APA format of tables and figures. Believe it or not. However, you want each table, each figure to be neat, clean, and clear, such that the reader can see the information that you're presenting. Again, they can follow it. Okay, they can see how you're coming up with your results. However, your tables and figures should be consistent throughout the document. Now, they don't have to all look exactly alike, okay? They don't have to be. But again, you want to go back to that predictability. Make sure they're neat, clean, and clear. So if you need to bold something to make that result pop or stand out, okay, that goes to that clarity, that clearness that the reader can see what you're aiming to communicate, okay? But the size of your figures, the size of your tables. So you don't want to have the writing so small that the reader has to look at it through a magnifying glass. Nor do you have to have where the table takes up the whole page, but you only have like four things in a table either. Okay. So you want neat, clean, clear, and you want them all to be consistent throughout the document. Yet they do not have to be exactly the same. Okay. And that also includes the titles and the labels. Now, in that instance, there is some um, uh, stylistic issues that are APA, okay, in how you format the titles and that sort of thing. And it also depends on who you're writing for. So you want to make sure that you check with your university, your publication, whoever it is that you are, presenting for. Okay. Your reader focus, again, predictability. You're writing for your reader or readers. So it should be reader focused. Okay. You're not writing for yourself. You're writing to communicate your information to readers. Okay. So it should be reader friendly. Again, the credibility, that's how you establish the authority of not just you, but your sources. Okay. The experts that you used in order to compile your information. And then the efficiency of your information. But always remember, focus on content, not necessarily the presentation. Okay. You want your readers to be able to follow your content, not be so concerned, well, why is this bold? Or why is this here? Or I thought, this is like confusing. So you want them to focus on the information that you've presented, the content, but not how you wrote it down, not how you put it together. So that all goes into that consistency. Remember, you want to be predictable. In this case, being predictable is okay. And then professionalism, which goes back to our standardization. So the standardization of structure, mechanics, bias-free language, being that candid, how we communicate the numbers, how we display our information. You want to always exhibit a sense of professionalism throughout. Okay. Well, that concludes our first workshop in this series. And what I would like for you to do is if you have any questions, to please reach out to the right place. And how can you do that? Well, right.place@aamu.edu. But you can also maybe make a comment about how you enjoyed this presentation. Is it what you expected or not? What would you like for us to focus on in our next presentation concerning APA? So again, this kind of gives you a gist of what we're going to talk about in our series of APA, in our writing series. However, today we focused on these two things: consistency and clarity. Okay. But also remember the other C's: credit, citation, construct, and candid, which is being bias free. Okay. All right. Thank you.